again, welcome to today's upload. My name's Stacey, I'm a mess in a dress, and this is my new setup, I think. It's a work in progress, but I've recently reorganised my whole bedroom, including my bookshelves, so that I've actually got a bit of a pretty backdrop that showcases some of my favourite books. So here we are, we're going to give it a go, and like I said, we may tweak it a little bit in the next few weeks, but this is it for now. So today is my March wrap up, and this is going to be my last big monthly wrap up video. As I mentioned before, they're just getting too darn long. I think at the last count there was like 30 something books that we read in March, and it's just getting too much to talk about in one video. So with no further ado, let's get stuck in. These are in no particular order because they're just as I wrote them down. Here we go. So first up in March, I kind of entered into a bit of a spur of the moment read along, buddy read, group read with Alicia from Alicia_reads and Charles from Charles Books on Stereo, and they were reading the Jane Henry series. What was the series called? Oh yeah, it was her Ruthless Doms series. And so they were reading these books, and I have read something by Jane Henry in the past and I couldn't really remember how that went. I had kind of mixed memories of it, but I thought they're kind of dark-ish mafia-esque romances, and I thought with a bit of a dom sub kind of relationship in there, so I thought they might be interesting, and I thought I would hop on and join in with the read along. Also, some of them are on Kindle Unlimited, which means I didn't have to buy them, hence breaking my book buying ban of March. I don't think I broke it too many times. I digress. Book one in the series is Priceless, and this one is the story of Nikolai and Marissa, I believe. Yeah, Marissa. And basically Nikolai has been kind of like a guardian, like bodyguard for Marissa for a long time, and he's always kind of been interested in her, but she's far too young and he's obviously like in charge of looking after her. And then I think they're at a party or some kind of function, and he overhears her father talking about the fact that he's going to sell her to somebody, as you do with your daughter. Why wouldn't you? And Nikolai decides he is not going to stand for this, so he kidnaps, kind of. Is it a kidnap or is it a rescue? You decide. Marissa, to take her away from the situation so she can't be sold into slavery or whatever. What really surprised me about this book is it didn't go down the way I expected it to. So at the very beginning, Nikolai and Marissa are together, they're alone, they're on the run. He knows that if the mafia kind of mob that he's run away from try and catch him down, they're probably going to try and kill him. And I kind of thought they would be together and be hiding an awful lot longer. In actual fact, they get caught really quickly. And she gets taken and he gets like beaten almost to death, and it's not good. And they get separated, and so actually then we have a bit of a time jump to she is now just about to be sold, and he has to do this whole fake getting into a different mafia to go and infiltrate the ring that's trying to buy her and save. Oh, it didn't go the way I expected it to go. Let's just leave it at that. And I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, but I think it was an interesting take on the whole mafia dom sub relationship. He has to pretend to be more dominant with her and kind of more treat her worse than he might maybe want to, because he's got to put on this front for the group that he's recently joined. He's basically working with a different mob in order to, I can't remember exactly what term they use in this one. I've read so many books like this month that they are starting to merge into one. But he's basically trying to work with a different group to infiltrate this whole system and to rescue her. And to do that, he's got to put on this facade of pretending to be not in love with her, not interested in her. She's purely just a slave to him. He's training her up so that he can give it to someone else. He's brought her from like a virgin slave market. I think somebody told me there was a virgin auction, and I was like, intriguing. It's not what I thought it was going to be at all. I've seen a lot of people say they don't particularly like the fact that she's a lot younger than him. She's meant to have had a crush on him for a long time, but it's still, there's an age gap there. And also the fact that he is ultimately dominant and more possessive and has ownership of her. And personally, it doesn't bother me because that's a trope that I don't mind. I'm not sure this was my favourite example of it I've ever seen. And I think I gave this book a 4 stars on Goodreads, and that was possibly a tad generous, because looking back, I've definitely read better Mafia, BDSM, Dom sub romances than this one, but it was okay. However, we then move on to book 2, which is Beyond Measure, and in this book we follow Thomas, who is the leader of the Bratva style mafia that we saw at the end of the first book. And I have to say, one of the things I struggled with the most in the first book was the character of Thomas, and the fact that Nikolai was okay working with him, considering the fact that Thomas, for the most part of book 1, is perfectly happy to purchase slaves from a virgin auction, which will then be given to his men, and basically just presumably rape them and use them in whichever way they seem fit. And then right at the end, when Nicola's like, I can't work for a guy who thinks that, you know, buying slaves is okay, Thomas just goes, okay, we were due for an update anyway, you know, that's a bit old-fashioned. And it's bizarre for me to have a character who is okay with the slave trade and doesn't really have like a moral problem with it, but at the same time isn't so tied into it that they won't just stop when confronted with it. It was just Thomas's character and the way he ran his organisation, to me, seemed really weird and didn't really work, and that's why I think the book really fell down in book 1 as it came towards the end of it. So then we get to book 2, which is all about Thomas, and already I'm thinking, but this guy, he thinks that the slave trade is fine. He's like, nah, you can buy a woman, who cares? And one of the things that I particularly like about Mafia and Bratva and the mob and all these kind of stories is that usually there's this running theme of, yes, the men run the show, yes, they are the bosses, yes, they are the dominant ones, but behind all of that is this uber respect and protectiveness for their women. Their women are held to the very highest kind of standards. They are shown the deepest respect. It's considered really low to go after someone's wife or children, and, you know, ultimately a lot of these kind of mafia romances, behind the scenes the women and the men are actually quite equal. It's just maybe a front that the guy is the dominant one in public, and this didn't quite do that for me. So basically Thomas enters into an arranged marriage with the sister of another kind of organisation, and she's kept very undercover, she's very protected. Turns out she's actually had a quite traumatic past. She's being sexually assaulted by one of her brother's friends, and she's got scars, both external and internal, from this whole thing. And so she goes, when she's given to Thomas, she's obviously very kind of frightened and very timid. I could never quite get behind their relationship dynamic. I know that we tried to show a little bit that she wasn't just going to constantly back down to him, but I really didn't appreciate Thomas's kind of, if you're my wife, you will bow down to me, and you will do as I tell you, and you will kind of think what I want you to think and say what I want you to say, but I still respect you, and eventually I'm gonna, I personally never really could get behind this romance at all. I didn't find it very satisfying, and I didn't feel all warm and fuzzy at the end of it. And like I said, a lot of this was down to Thomas and his kind of organisation and the way they treated their women and the way they viewed them. It just didn't work for me. There were some bits that did, so I gave it 3 stars, but ultimately it is not one I'd bother to go read again. And because I didn't really love book 1 or book 2, I didn't even bother to go read book 3, so who knows what that one's like. My next book of the month, however, was a bit of a really nice surprise, I guess. It was an arc that I got through NetGalley, and it was The Pleasure Contract by Caitlin Crews, I think her name was. Caitlin Crews, Crews. And yeah, on the front, this is sold as a billionaire romance. The hero prefers to have contracts with girlfriends where basically he sets out the rules of their relationship, they follow them as per the contract, they get loads of money for doing it. And that in itself is a pretty standard trope. It's a bit of a cliche, but it can be quite enjoyable, which is one of the reasons why I went to pick this book. And ultimately, I was expecting lots of sexy times, lots of chemistry between them. He would be a bit kind of broody and a bit slightly dark hero, and she would be quite a sassy, feisty heroine who would eventually get him to see the error of his ways. And that is exactly what I got. But also so much more. What I liked about this one is it really kind of made me look at that kind of relationship and why would you as a heroine go for that relationship, and why would a hero want that relationship, and ultimately what would happen when both of you wanted more. So our hero is Lachlan, and he advertises for a new girlfriend, a contracted girlfriend. I can't remember what they call it, but it is basically that. And Bristol, our heroine, is told by her sister about it, and she's kind of like, look, this dude is hot, he is mega rich, he showers his girlfriends with affection, presumably he's good in bed, and, you know, why don't you go for it? You live a really boring life, you don't have a lot of money, it would be great for you to kind of have some enjoyment. And Bristol, quite rightly, thinks her sister is crazy, because this sounds awful. What kind of man has contracts with his girlfriends and hires them, and there's an interview process and all the rest of it? Her sister does the application for her, behind her back, doesn't tell her, and Bristol ends up getting invited to an interview to be Lachlan's girlfriend. And for reasons kind of a little bit vague, but basically I think just a bit of curiosity and all the rest of it, she goes along to the interview. And when she sits down in front of this panel, he's not there. It's just like a panel of assistants who've come to select his next girlfriend. She just does what any self-respecting woman would do in that situation, and she laughs her head off. She's just like, this is ridiculous. What the heck are you doing? What is he doing? What am I doing? And she gets up and leaves. And he sees a video of this, he sees a clip, and he then is fascinated and goes to find her. What I found interesting about this particular book is their first intimate experience, their first kind of connection is not under contract. It is mutual. They're both up for it. She is attracted to him, he is attracted to her. But he, after that, insists that if she wants to continue a relationship with him, it has to be on his terms, it has to be under the terms of the contract, because that's how he works. He doesn't want any of the rigmarole and the hassle that goes with a real relationship, any of the kind of, you know, the responsibilities that you have, the you have to call me back, or you have to act a certain way, or you forgot my birthday, any of that. He just wants someone to be at his beck and call. And Bristol, for various reasons, decides to go along with it. Like I said, she is attracted to him, but ultimately it's just an arrangement. What really won me over with this book is the way that that relationship then builds, and both of them begin to realise that actually this contract is restricting the relationship they can have, because she doesn't feel that she can tell him when he does something that upsets her, because that's not what the contract demands. And he begins to realise that he's not actually getting a genuine experience with her, because she's only ever following the rules of the contract, so she isn't maybe doing or saying the things that she would do if she was in a genuine relationship. And ultimately, at the point when they both kind of declare their feelings a little bit and admit that they would prefer more, she actually shuts him down and says, look, you can't say that you love me or that you want to be with me because you don't know me. You haven't been in a relationship with me. You've been in a relationship with me, the girlfriend assistant, who has followed your rules and done what you said and never spoken out of turn and never said something that might annoy you and never told you off when you annoyed me. And that's really not genuine. And so you can't say that you actually love me because you don't know me. And I thought that was a really interesting point, because a lot of these romances, they just end with them both going, oh, actually I love you, be my girlfriend for real. And you go, but it's a completely unnatural environment. It's a completely out of whack power dynamic where the girl is never going to be in a position to say her mind and say what she thinks. And I really liked that the author actually picked up on that and used that as a plot device. And then the book isn't over. He then has to convince her that he does want to try a genuine relationship and get to know her properly, and there's a whole, I won't go into how he does it, but he does it, and it was really satisfying, it was really enjoyable. And so I just liked the fact that it took that trope and that cliche and it just pushed it just that little bit further than I was expecting it to. So this was one of my surprise, really enjoyable reads of the month, and I'll definitely be looking for more books by this author. This was also a Mills and Boon Heat book, so it's just part of their like slightly steamier series that they do, and as you can see, I have a lot of Mills and Boon romances, so I was pleased to add more one to the mix. So next, I continued reading through the Immortals After Dark series, the Cresley Cole series, with the lovely seasonally booked up Immortals After Dark read along. We read McReeve and Dark Sky. In that order? Opposite order. Dark Sky comes first, then McReeve, I think. Dark Sky, I don't actually have the physical copy of that one. I think it's one of like the only ones I don't have now. So Dark Sky is the story of Lanthe and Thronos. Thronos is a reckoner and Lanthe is a sorceress. We've seen them in other books. We've kind of got a bit of their history. They are a friends to enemies to lovers romance, which I really enjoy. You see lots and lots of stuff with them when they're little, and you see them kind of becoming friends and then realising that ultimately that's going to be more, that they're fated mates, and then you see them fall out and you see all the reasons why they fell out, and it is really tragic because there's a lot of lies and misconceptions and a lot of kind of misunderstandings and kind of untruths between the two of them, where they both think they know what happened but they don't actually know what happened. And then their actual love story is just a bit bonkers really, but then it is Cresley Cole and he kidnaps her. He's planning on getting his revenge. She has done things in the past that have left him severely injured and in a lot of pain. And they end up going on this weird interdimensional adventure where they go to lots of different worlds, basically on a bit of a wild goose chase. It's one of the wackiest of the books for me. There's a great bit in like an underwater realm. There's a great bit in a sex realm. It's just crazy. It's fun. It's sexy. It's romantic. It's sweet. I have to say the ending isn't one of my favourites. I don't particularly love the way it all wraps up. They are separated for a while and it just didn't really work for me after you'd had them coming together, but it's still a Cresley Cole book. It's still wonderful and I still love it. But then we get on to what is one of my all-time favourite Cresley Cole Immortal After Dark books of all time, and that is McReeve. McReeve is a Lykie, or a werewolf, if you want to go, you know, dumb it down a bit. And he has a very tragic past, and I will warn you that the opening kind of section of this book is really hard to read. It features some incredibly difficult topics surrounding kind of child abuse and sexual assault, and it is rough. I've now read it probably about 20 to 30 times, so I'm kind of desensitised, but a lot of the girls who read this for the first time were genuinely quite emotionally affected by it. However, it is kind of important to see that process that he goes through because it really does form his character and ultimately the relationship that he has with the heroine. The heroine is Chloe, and she is such a fantastic heroine because she's so kick-ass. She's a bit of a tomboy, she's into soccer, she just does not give in for one moment, and she's thrust into this world of immortals and paranormal beings and scary things and monsters, and she just doesn't know what to do with herself, but simultaneously she doesn't kind of hide from that or back down. She's really fierce, really feisty, and I just absolutely love her. It's really hard to talk about this book without giving massive spoilers away because even what happens to Chloe is a huge spoiler and you can't kind of say anything, and why her relationship with McReeve is so important and why it has so many problems are all huge spoilers. You couldn't talk about them without ruining the book, and it is such a satisfying process to go through the book and see it all unfurl. There are so many shock moments where you're just like, no, I can't believe they're going to do that. Cresley does it all the time. That's what she's known for, that's what she's great for, but I absolutely love this book. McReeve goes from being ultra soft and affectionate and lovely and protective to being an absolute arsewipe, and then goes back again. Chloe is fierce and feisty but also really vulnerable and needing protection. It's just this lovely emotional journey that literally it just drags you over a roller coaster, but at the end I always am just completely thrilled by it. I've read it so many times now and I love it every time I read it, so absolutely 5-star, one of my favourites in the series. So next up, we finished off the Victorian Rebels read-along with the Romance Book Squad with Seducing a Stranger, which used to be called A Dark and Stormy Night and was book 7 in the Victorian Rebels series, but it's now been rebranded as Seducing a Stranger and it is book 1 in the Good Girls series. And so I decided that as I read this one, this was actually a reread, I read this back in December I think, I decided I would also go straight from this and read all of the books that have been released in the series so far. So I started with Seducing a Stranger. Like I said, it was a reread, and I have spoken about this before. It is It was just as enjoyable the second time around. Morley is such an ace character. It has one of the sexiest, most awesome meet cutes that isn't really a meet cute, but you'll know what I mean when you read it, that I've ever read. I just love it. I also love the fact that having now read the first 6 books of the Victorian Rebel series, which I hadn't when I read this for the first time, I couldn't believe how much stuff there is in this one about those books, and how when I read those books I totally didn't remember any of it. So there are so many things in here that give away plot points. So if you're going to read this one and you want to read the Victorian Rebels and you haven't already, I really would recommend going back and reading this first, because this gives away huge parts of the plot twists in those books. But I had completely forgotten when I read it, so it didn't bother me. But yeah, this was just as enjoyable the second time round. So the next one in the series is Courting Trouble, and this one features Nora, who we saw in Seducing a Stranger. She is Prudence's sister. She was married to the villain in book 1. And her romance was not what I expected. I did really, really enjoy it, but it really wasn't I didn't know what I thought it was going to be, but it wasn't that. The book actually starts in the past and we see Nora growing up. She is cared for by a call boy on her family's estate who is Titus, and he looks after her, and eventually they become friends, and then they fall in love, and then they get separated. And I think, is she told by her father that she has to stay away from him, that old chestnut, because otherwise her father will ruin him, and so they're separated. And then we are hoisted forward to what is effectively the end of Seducing a Stranger, where when Honoria has been shot and she is taken to the local doctor to be fixed up, and that doctor is Titus from her childhood. He's now kind of, you know, lifted himself up, he's had some training, he's become a doctor, he's really well respected in his field, and he has a number of surgeries that help out kind of poorer people as well as helping out the rich people, and he treats her and they reconnect. It was really, really, really sweet. I liked the fact that they quite quickly had the conversation about what happened and what went wrong, and I like the fact they didn't kind of wait too long to have that conversation. They got in there and they sorted it all out, and then they get involved in the relationship again, and then you see them have to deal with, he is technically from a different social status, she's obviously now had a quite horrific marriage at the hands of her first husband, plus she's quite openly taken lovers, which is one of the reasons her husband went on a bit of a killing spree. So it's a really interesting romance. It's not my favourite over Seducing a Stranger, I think I prefer book 1, but it is still really sweet, and it was nice to see how Honoria got the way she did, and also where she ends up. So the next book I read in the series, I honestly don't know where exactly it's meant to come, because I've seen it on different sites in different positions. Sometimes it's described as book 3, sometimes it's described as like book 5.5. I don't know, I read it next. It's a novella, it's the Earl of Christmas Past, or Making Merry, depending on where you read it and depending on where you pick it up from. And it's a really cute little paranormal novella romance. Our heroine Vanessa is staying at a local inn in Scotland because she is trying to hunt down the Loch Ness Monster, I believe, to take a photograph of him. I think that's what she's doing. It's a bit weird. And she stays in this room in this inn. It's the only room that's available, and it is haunted. And it's haunted by the ghost of Jonathan, who is a soldier who died at the Battle of Culloden. I think that's right. And he basically just like makes himself known to her. I think she's in the bath at the time, and they get chatting and they get flirting, and it's this very, very short, sweet novella, but also the whole time is that knowledge that he is a ghost, so he's dead, and she is, you know, a human, and how could this possibly end up happily? It was a really satisfying, interesting way of wrapping up the story. I really liked it. It is connected to the Victorian Rebels and the Good Girl series very, very, very loosely, although I would say I don't really think the connection is particularly important, but it is a lot of fun, and it's a really sweet little, very short read. It doesn't take you long to get through it. And then the last book that I read in the series is Dancing with Danger, which is, it was a bit of a sleeper hit, this was. I did not expect to like this one as much as I did. So at the end of Courting Trouble, we meet a couple of brothers who are like French gangster type. You think they're going to be villains, and then there was just something about the way Kerrigan wrote them that made me think, these guys are going to be heroes in a future book. I wasn't wrong. Here we are. We have Raphael, and he keeps bumping into Mercy, who is one of the twins from the previous books, and she's like this little investigator. She finds a friend has been murdered and she's trying to uncover what's happened in the crime. She initially suspects Raphael, but then she thinks that he might be able to help her uncover the real culprit, and they spend an awful lot of time together trying to uncover this crime. I just loved Raphael. I just really did. I just love the fact that he's so open with her from like the very beginning. He's like, I'm not going to use the words because it's kind of rude, but he basically is like, I want to sleep with you. I just, you know, I can't offer you anything and I can't give you anything, but I just really fancy you and I want to be with you. And she's like, tempting. I really liked their romance. I really liked all the stuff with Raphael and his brother Gabriel, who is then going to be the hero in the next book, which I'm super excited for after reading this one because there's so much about him and his past as well that's really interesting. It was just, again, a really nice, just a really satisfying romance novel. Kerrigan Byrne just can do no wrong in my eyes. This was such a cute little series. It's not as gritty. It's not as kind of emotionally draining, I don't think, for me personally, as the Victorian Rebels books are, but it is still this really kind of fast-paced, exciting read, just like Seducing a Stranger, and I loved it. I think probably Dancing with Danger will be up there as one of my favourite books in this particular series, so definitely one to check out. They are all on Kindle Unlimited as well, so added bonus. So next up, I got another arc from NetGalley, and this one was Absolute Silence by Jill Ramsower. Sorry, probably just massacred the pronunciation on that one, but this one was kind of in the blurb. It made it sound like it was going to be a BDSM sex club style romance, and it is to a point, but it's also half mafia romance, and I think that's why I ultimately didn't really gel with this one. So Camilla is from a kind of really overprotective mafia family, and she, for some reason, decides that she wants to go and check out this sex club because she wants to be a bit more free, she wants to kind of experience new things, and so she goes along to this club, and while she's there she meets Philip, and Philip is known to her through her family, and so she begs him not to tell her family that he's seen her there and not to, like, you know, let them know what she's doing in her spare time, and his kind of condition is that he will keep her secret if she only goes to meet him. So she's not just going there to meet random people, she is going there specifically to meet him, and they then embark on a sexual relationship at first. It's not meant to be any more than that. And that was all fine, and it was great, and I liked his protective quality. I liked seeing him kind of try to look after her, but also try and initiate her and teach her about the lifestyle and the things she'd gone there, kind of testing her boundaries and finding out her limits and stuff. So that was all fine. I think the fact that it was then also half a mafia romance, and there is also then a villain, and there's all bits with the family, it just felt a bit much. This is book 5 in the series, and I don't know, having never read any of the other books in the series, whether or not if I'd read other ones that would have filled in some of the backstory of these families so that maybe I didn't feel quite so out of the loop. I did feel like I had a lot of catching up to do and that I'd missed something. It was quite difficult to get to engage with the characters on the level that I maybe wanted to. I just think I gave this one 4 stars on Goodreads because technically I think it was a really good book. It was the pacing was fine, the writing was good, the characterization of the 2 main characters was interesting, their romance was sweet, the villain was kind of different to your ordinary just bog standard villain. I think I just personally would have preferred it if it was more BDSM romance or more mafia romance, but not necessarily kind of on the lines of both of them. It just felt a bit like it fell between 2 stools for me, but ultimately it was fine. So the next books I read were with Reading in Fairyland buddy reads that she does, and we were finishing off the Wallflower series by Lisa Kleypas, and the next book that we had to read was Devlin in Winter, which is the one that I'd heard so much about. Like, everybody had been raving about Sebastian St. Vincent and how much of an awesome anti-hero he is, and obviously we met him at the end of book 2 when he doesn't necessarily act in the best possible way. I know a lot of people are not happy with the way he acts at the end of book 2. I personally didn't care because that's the kind of person I am, but I finally got to meet him, I finally got to see him, and I was really interested to see how this relationship was going to work out because he is paired up with Evie, who is the uber shy, nervous, anxious one who can't even speak to people, let alone stand up for herself. And so I was really curious to see how this was all going to pan out. and I absolutely loved it. I have to say, I'm completely on the bandwagon with everybody else of loving this book. It was so great. I think Sebastian is a cracking anti-hero. I love how quickly he becomes protective of Evie and of how quickly he wants to look after her and to keep her safe. And he's so great when her family are being horrible, and he's like constantly throwing himself in front of her to protect her, which I just adore. But even more special is Evie, and just how she takes control of that situation. And she is really timid and she is really nervous, but she's also incredibly direct. She tells him exactly what she wants, she gives him the rules, and she just goes for it. And ultimately she calls most of the shots in this relationship. Like, he's the really experienced, quite dominant male, the alpha male, and she absolutely controls the relationship. She tells him that if he wants a serious relationship with her, if he wants a proper marriage, he's going to have to, I think, does she tell him he's got to be celibate for like 3 months or something, which is hilarious. She just doesn't take any shit from him, really, and I love that about her. So I was 100% on Team Sebastian and Evie. This was a cracking book. And then we finished the series off with Scandal in Spring also by Lisa Kleypas, obviously, duh. And this was the one I knew the least about. I hadn't even read the back of the book. I didn't know. I knew it was obviously about Daisy, who was Lillian's sister from book 2, but I didn't know her romance or where it was going to end up. I had heard that it wasn't going to go the way you think it's going to go, because she is kind of paired up with a guy in book 3. Book 2 or book 3? She meets a guy, and you think that that's where it's going to end up, and it doesn't. And you think that's who she's going to be paired up with, and she isn't. It's a completely new character called Matthew. You know me, I like a bad guy. I like a bad boy. I like a mean, alpha, nasty hero. And Matthew is none of those things. And I loved it. He was so sweet and so soft and so smitten, and he's so adorable. And he has a secret past, but it's not necessarily a dark past, or not really. And he's just so gone for Daisy, like, from the very start, and she has to kind of really slowly come to realise that actually he's kind of in love with her, and he has been for ages. And then she has to see him in a whole new light, and he's always been this annoying employee of her father, and now suddenly he's this fascinating and also attractive man in her life. And I think always having someone who is smitten with you is also quite attractive. And I just loved watching their relationship develop, and I loved seeing it all come together. And then ultimately when she has to stick up for him and be really protective of him, even though she's not 100% sure of the circumstances that she's protecting him from, this was the surprise hit for me. I'd expected to enjoy Devil in Winter. I didn't realise I was going to like this one so much, and this one just blew me away. It was an amazing end to the series, and I can't wait to read more by Lisa Kleypas in the very near future. So then the Romance Book Squad announced that they were going to be reading Pam Godwin's Sea of Ruin and her accompanying novella, which is King of Libertines. And this is her dark pirate romance. I've read some Pam Godwin. She's like scary dark. It gets tough in there, guys. And so I was a little bit worried about reading Sea of Ruin because of some of the things I've heard about it. I'd also heard that it featured cheating and maybe a love triangle, and it just sounded like an awful lot of tropes that I'm not on board for. So I've put off reading this for a really long time. Then the Romance Book Squad said they were going to read it, so after a lot of whittling and a lot of kind of wringing my hands, I finally decided to go for it. I did speak to a couple of my friends on Instagram just to ask them to spoil bits of it for me so I could check whether or not it was going to like be a total no-go for me, because there are certain things I just can't tolerate and I will not read books that have them in, and they assured me that it wasn't going to go that way. So I got stuck in. I read the novella first, which is King of Libertines, and this shows Bennett and Priest, who are the hero, the heroine and the hero of Sea of Ruin, meeting up for the first time. It was great. It was really sexy. It was lovely characterisation. Bennett is a really interesting, she is a female pirate captain. She's sassy, she's feisty, she's leading this pirate ship, she's in control, she takes no shit from Priest. I really loved her. Priest is the uber sexy, kind of quite promiscuous pirate, but he seems really drawn to Bennett and he seems really just fascinated by her. And I really enjoyed the novella and I really liked it. And one of the reasons why I then took ages to go and actually pick up Sea of Ruin, because I knew they were going to spoil it all. I knew that it starts with Bennett and Priest not being together because priest has cheated on her. And ultimately I was just like, oh, I'm not gonna like this book, am I? Like, I'm just not. Cheating's a big no for me. It just always is. It's the romance cardinal rule. I can't stand cheating in romance novels. It has no place in like fictional romance. There's no excuse for it. So I eventually picked the heroine up, and I tried to go with an open mind, and I tried to read it as if I knew nothing about it and if I was just reading it for the first time. And obviously there's an awful lot of hype around this book. A lot of people talk about how amazing it is, and Pam Godwin, you know, is a fantastic writer. Her writing style is just wonderful. She's so easy to read in terms of the plot just gallops along and you're just sucked in, but she can be quite difficult to read because the themes and the topic that she's discussing and she's showing you are quite gut-wrenching. So it can be quite a tough process to read a Pam Godwin book, and Sea of Ruin kind of isn't really much different. It's not as dark in themes as some of her other stuff. I mean, you try reading her Deliver series and you will see what I mean. But there is a lot of dark stuff going on. There's a lot of sexual assault. There's a lot of, I mean, Bennett is held captive at some basically for like 70% of the book she's being held captive by someone. She's sexually assaulted. She's openly raped at one point. She's beaten like black and blue. And I think that's where the book fell down for me. I don't kind of want to talk too much about the plot because it is there is quite a substantial twist in the plot that is integral to the storyline, and it kind of spoils it if you know it's coming, unless you want to know it's coming. If you want to know it's coming, hit me up and I will tell you. But I just felt ultimately there were two reasons that this book didn't quite go to the full like 5-star amazing read that I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be dark and I wanted it to be challenging. I wanted it to drag me through the emotional ringer and spit me out the other side. And ultimately I think the reason it just fell a little bit flat is because Bennett's meant to be this super independent, strong female, and she spends most of the book waiting to be rescued. And I get that she's a woman in a man's world. She's surrounded by men who are bigger and stronger than her, a lot of whom have like guns and weapons and stuff, but she just spends so much time, I mean literally being used as a human punching bag, just waiting for the boys to come along and rescue her. And I just wanted to see her rescue herself or take some kind of ownership of her own safety. It just felt like there were so many points that if the boys hadn't have turned up, she would have died, or she would have been like, you know, held in some kind of slavery captivity forever. And I really just, I wanted more for the character than that. It just made me sad that she never really got like a breakout, I am kick-ass and I don't need you to save me moment. So that made me sad. And I'm going to put a spoiler warning here because I do want to talk about the final segment of the book. But ultimately, the relationship between Bennett and Priest and Ashley, which is obviously the big kind of twist, just never really gelled for me. It never felt like, I think at one point, you know, Bennett's wondering whether you can love two people. And I think, you know, you definitely can. And they did, but it always felt that they each loved each other individually as opposed to loving the three of them together. And that for me is where it fell down, because I think the best polyamorous relationships, I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean, the best threesome relationships or reverse harem relationships or any relationship that isn't just two people work best when the unit as a whole feels like it's one big solid foundation of relationship. And this one felt like Bennett loved Priest and Bennett loved Ashley, and Ashley loved Priest and Ashley loved Bennett and Priest, but they didn't necessarily need them all to be together. It was just they couldn't all be with each other individually, so they were going to have to just all be together. But I don't know, there was just something about the relationship that never really gelled for me. I felt like they'd probably spend an awful lot of time alone with one of the others rather than as a threesome, and that just made me feel a bit dissatisfied with it. So it didn't quite work for me. I think I gave it 4 stars just because it is a tremendously well written book and it is a very riveting read. It really is, but it just didn't quite hit the mark for me. So then I also read Bound to a Warrior by Donna Fletcher, and this one was just a fun little historical romance I picked up. I think I saw it on Jessen's channel, and it basically features a hero and a heroine who are chained to each other for the majority of the storyline. That was like an instant draw to me. I just thought that's a really interesting premise. How are you gonna get through all of these daily obstacles while chained to another human being in a historical romance setting where, you know, you used to having privacy and you're used to being kept separate from another member of the opposite sex. So this is going to be interesting. I do think that you have to suspend disbelief for basically the whole of this book. The whole premise is ridiculous. It just it feels almost fantasy-esque because it just seems a little bit silly, but as long as you can just throw yourself in there and just enjoy it, then it is a really fun, enjoyable read. I really liked the characters, I really liked all the crazy situations they found themselves in, and I really liked where it ultimately ended. It is part of a series, and there is one plot point that I'm guessing is not going to be resolved until kind of the end of the series, so even though I wouldn't say it's my favourite book that I read in March, I'm definitely going to have to go and read the rest of the books in the series just to find out where this is all going to end. But it was a lot of fun, and like I said, if you're after something a bit lighthearted and a bit just daft for a while, then I would really recommend giving this one a try. So I hadn't planned on doing this in 2 parts, but I think given the fact that this has already taken me a phenomenal length of time to get halfway through my list, and I am now pretty tired, I'm gonna pause there and pick this up again tomorrow with part 2. Thank you very much if you've managed to get this far, and I will see you again soon.